And now, it's BoomerLife, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is BoomerLife on CIL 650.
It's gonna be a long night. It's gonna be alright. On the night shift.
And welcome back to the show, and thanks again to SleepShop, your sleep experts, for putting this show together. We have Dr. Maureen Seresny on the phone, psychiatrist and co-director, University of British Columbia Sleep Disorder Clinic. So we've been talking, in the first segment about, people are more aware. I think I've heard more about sleep apnea in the last 5 years than I'd ever heard before. It's much more top of mind. And I think, the Canucks in some way have done something to help with sleep as well. They have, maybe it's somebody from your clinic, help the team when they're on the road, when they should travel, when they should sleep. Is sleep just becoming more top of mind to people?
I think so. I definitely think in terms of teams like the Canucks or other elite athletes, it's being increasingly recognized as something that can affect performance. Mm-hmm. I have a colleague, Dr. Chuck Samuels, who is in Calgary, who works with some of the Olympic and Paralympic athletes on this very issue, and they're putting some really good resources into helping the athletes sleep better so that they can train better and rest better. Mm-hmm. And in general, that seems to be helping their performance in their sports.
Well, the jokes kind of write themselves. I guess the Canucks aren't getting enough sleep.
No comment.
All right. No, we don't want the Toronto Maple Leafs to get more sleep. So
no, we can disturb their sleep as much as we like.
So what happens when you're sleeping? What goes on when you're asleep? There's repair going on. There's all kinds of things. But can you kind of describe it?
Wow. Well, there's a lot of things, actually. The body cycles through a few different types of sleep during the night. So most people have heard about REM sleep, which is a phase of sleep where the brain is very active. It's dreaming. It's thinking about all kinds of weird and wonderful things. But the body during REM is actually quite quiet. Mm-hmm. But there are a few other stages of sleep that we cycle through. So there's a light stage that's sort of in between. That's called stage 1. We usually spend maybe 5 to 10% of our night at tops in stage 1, and then most of our time is spent in stage 2, which is sort of a medium depth sleep that again is going to be restorative for us. And then there's another deep sleep that's called stage 3 sleep or delta sleep, where the brain activity is actually a bit slower and calmer, and that has its own function. So there's lots of research going into why do we sleep and what's the importance of sleep. We think that some of the stages like REM, for example, are involved in things like memory, solidifying memory. Same thing with the deep delta sleep. It has been linked to basically consolidating memory. In other words, when we make connections between things during the day, the job of the brain at night is going to be strengthening the connections that we're using a lot and kind of pruning out the connections that we don't use a lot. So that's a restorative type of sleep for the body, as well as it's doing some things in terms of improving and solidifying memory.
Well, one thing I just want to jump in on that. I heard it described one time. So you have a day, and your brain at night is making file folders of what's important and what isn't important, discarding what's not important, and keeping the memories that are important.
Exactly. It's like backing up your computer almost.
Right.
Yeah, and that deep delta sleep is also where certain hormones are released, like growth hormone, which we know is involved in repairing and sort of rebuilding muscle. Mm-hmm. So, if you have a hard workout or something like that, that delta sleep is one of the things that helps kind of your muscles get reset back to normal, and that's where we're doing a lot of our repair. So all of the different phases of sleep have their own individual functions, and they're all pretty important. In terms of the physiology of the sleep, in other words, what's happening with the systems of the body, like the heart and the breathing and all of that, usually it's a time for those to rest a little bit as well. Usually the blood pressure goes down a little bit during sleep. Our breathing rate slows down a little bit in sleep. A heart rate usually goes down. Although there's a bit of variability in those during the night, and that's a normal part. And it, again, depends on the sleep stage. But it's meant to really be a restorative phase for the body.
Do you ever have people that can, not can only, but I mean, they don't go into one or two of these segments of sleep? They never really get there. Is that one of the problems? You only sort of have to, in one kind of cycle?
Well, we do see people. I mean, keep in mind we're studying people in a sleep laboratory, so there's a bit of a selection bias there in terms of picking people who have a problem with sleep.
Sure.
So we may see people that are not getting into certain stages of sleep. Maybe they're not getting into the deepest stages of sleep. Part of that can be age-related. We tend to get less deep sleep as we age. Part of that can be related to other things disturbing our night, like pain problems or things like that. And unfortunately, being in the sleep lab can affect that a little bit. If you can imagine lying in a narrow hospital bed with lots of wires on you and all of that.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
You don't sleep exactly the same as you do at home. So,
no, we had some other doctors on from North Shore Anxiety and Health Clinic, and Farouk from SleepShop set that up for one of our last shows. And I asked the same question, and you're a psychiatrist, so I thought I'd ask you, why are things that bother you and that you worry about seem to be worse at night? Like, you wake up in the morning and you're like, why was I up half the night worrying about that? It seems clearer in the morning. Is there something that happens when we're sleeping?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. I think the way I explain this to my patients is that the brain has kind of a limited bandwidth that it can process at a given amount of time. In other words, there's only so much data it can take in. And so if it's like a slow internet connection, right? When everyone else in the condo building is using their internet, yours is a little bit slower. It's the same kind of idea where if your brain is occupied in thinking about other things, there's less bandwidth available to think about worries or things like that. Now, depending on how strong the worry is, sometimes the worry can take up a lot of that bandwidth and distract from other things. But for a lot of us, we can kind of put the worry aside because we're busy doing other things. We're running around, we're working, we're exercising, or whatever, and we can kind of put that aside a little bit. At nighttime, one of the problems is there's not a lot else going on. So when we wake up at night and the brain, it starts thinking about something, there's not a lot of other distractions. And for people who have insomnia, there's also this little dialogue that goes on. I hear this all the time. So it's this thing of, I'm awake. Why am I awake? I shouldn't be awake. Oh, I really need to get back to sleep. So there's all of that stuff that goes on about the sleep itself and, I've got something important on. What happens if I don't sleep tonight? And the more we try to clear our mind and not think about anything, sometimes the more those thoughts just creep in. It's like telling someone not to think about pink elephants, and of course that's the only thing they can think about.
Well, the other thing about my father suffered insomnia for forever, and he's dealing with it now, and I think a lot of it had to do with sleep apnea, actually. He has a CPAP machine. And the thing is, he dreaded going to bed because he knew he was going to be up from 2 until 5 in the morning.
Exactly. And it can be a real problem for people. When you've had insomnia for a while, your brain expects to have a problem. That bed becomes kind of a battleground, between you and your sleep system that's not doing what you want it to do. And one of the other things that's kind of important is that the brain doesn't have the same, how shall I say, it's not sort of as engaged and as alert in the middle of the night as it is in the daytime. So some of the problems that would be really easy to solve at, 10 in the morning, at 2 o'clock in the morning, your brain isn't really as efficient at solving them. And so they keep circling around and around and around because it can't quite catch a hold of them.
That's interesting. I was just going to ask, we hear so much about anxiety as well in society these days. Is it on the rise?
I don't know if it's on the rise or if it's just recognized more. Mental health in general has always been one of those topics that is don't ask, don't tell. And I think that it's something that hopefully we're bringing more attention to. Some of the campaigns out there where, we're encouraging dialogue about it, and we're having people come out and say, I have this too. So trying to kind of reduce the stigma may be helping to bring people forward to say, yes, I have a problem, or to be willing to deal with it. So I think that's helping a little bit. And we have a lot of treatments available for it now that, 40 or 50 years ago we didn't really have. So I think that may be helping a lot. But I think in general, the estimates of anxiety disorders of one kind or another in the population are somewhere around 15%.
That high? Wow.
So it's on a par with depression. They're both really common, and people can have both, unfortunately.
And does it get worse with less sleep?
For most people, it probably would. Yeah. And the same thing with mood. When you don't sleep well, your mood tends to get a little bit more irritable or more down, or even just a little bit more what we call labile. It'll bounce around a little bit more. Sometimes people will describe feeling more emotional or feeling like things are a little closer to the surface. They're more easily moved to tears, or they're just more easily irritated by things that normally wouldn't bother them.
Well, I think we all have experienced those days. And is there such a thing as getting up on the wrong side of the bed?
Well, I think maybe not so much literally, but figuratively, yes.
It's funny, sometimes you wake up and the alarm goes off, but you might have been in a certain portion of your sleep, a certain cycle of your sleep where you weren't ready to wake up, or other mornings maybe you were closer to the end of a cycle, so it's easier to get up. And I think that happens to people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's different theories about that. Certainly people describe waking from certain phases of sleep as a little bit more tricky. REM sleep, for example, where the body is sort of by design, by nature, the brain is telling the body not to move or to be quiet. And relax the muscles and everything. So trying to wake someone out of that, they often feel like they're waking out of their very deep sleep. Or the other phase, the delta sleep, people will often describe that if they wake out of delta, they feel kind of groggy or not with it. They have something called sleep inertia, where it takes a long time to kind of shake it off.
Well, I must be getting out of delta sleep every morning till I get my big cup of coffee.
Probably not, but and one of the tricky parts too with coffee, we get into the habit of drinking coffee in the morning to kind of perk us up a little bit. Sometimes there can be a component of caffeine withdrawal by the next day, so it's one of the things that could be contributing to sleepiness could be that you're running low on caffeine for what your usual well,
the trick is to not stop drinking it. That's the thing.
Well, it's always a bit of a catch-22 because it can really affect the sleep at night. And some of my patients are so sensitive that any caffeine at all can still disturb their sleep. I have other people that say, I can have a double espresso at 11:30 and be asleep at 11:45, and it doesn't bother me at all. So people are quite individual that way. But in general, we say, keep the caffeine to the morning and maybe switch to decaffeinated in the afternoon and evening, just to be on the safe side.
Absolutely. Dr. Saresny joins me on the phone from the University of British Columbia Sleep Disorders Clinic. We're going to continue our conversation about getting a good night's sleep with SleepShop next on CL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.